for everybody, I'm Dr. Carol Cox and I'm head of the Liverpool Centre for Advanced Policing Studies, and I'm here to introduce Chief Constable Gavin Stevens for this lecture. But before I do so, I think it'd be remiss of me not to also thank Serena Kennedy, who's in the audience, who is the Chief of Merseyside until, is it August, Serena? Yeah. So I just wanted to take that opportunity for us here at LCAPS and LJMU to thank her for all her support. And when she obviously was and is still Chief until August, and wish her good luck in her retirement. So if everyone could put together their hands and congratulate her on her retirement. Gavin was elected to the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council in 2022 and took up the role in April 2023, having served in Surrey Police from Constable to Chief Constable. As chair of the NPCC, Gavin is responsible for ensuring strong coordination and collaboration across UK policing, including British overseas territories and Crown dependencies. As everyone is probably aware, policing practices across the UK are held together by strong principles and values which are rooted in policing by consent. Working together with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, the College of Policing, Her Majesty's Inspectorate and the National Crime Agency and many other public and voluntary bodies, Gavin ensures the NPC contributes to a shared vision of achieving the most trusted and engaging police service in the world by making communities safer and stronger, which obviously we all think is crucial. Gavin is the Senior Responsible Officer for the National Police Race Action Plan. He's Director of Blue Light Commercial and Police Digital Services, and he chairs the boards of the Criminal Records Office. He is a patron of the Police Mutual Assurance Society. In his former role as Chief Constable of Surrey, Gavin was chair of the NPCC Finance Coordination Committee and the NPC Communications Advisory Group. Prior to that, he was the NPCC lead for neighbourhood policing and chaired the committee to produce the College of Policing guidelines on modernising neighbourhood policing. If I have to say NPCC again, okay? There's a lot of NPCCs in there. Born and bred in Hartlepool on the North East Coast, Gavin studied engineering and management studies at the University of Cambridge and worked for GEC Marconi Research as a sponsored student. Upon graduation, he joined Cambridge Constabulary and then transferred to Surrey Police in 1996. He worked across a wide variety of roles, including head of serious and organised crime, professional standards, and often returned to his passion of neighbourhood policing, which is a good opening for your presentation today, Policing in a Polarised World. Welcome.
Thank you. Hey, you know, thanks ever so much for turning out on a very sunny Friday bank holiday evening. And delaying your visit down to the pub. I'm really grateful for you doing that. I'm sure there's plenty of fine places out there you could be at the moment, so I'm grateful for the dedication that you've shown. It's a real pleasure to be back in Liverpool, a place that always makes you feel welcome, just like my hometown, a slightly smaller port on the northeast coast, but equally vibrant with life. Hartlepool. So just in case you were wanting to get your orientation there, it took me a while to find that map on the internet. Both are places of real historic importance in times of conflict, international trade, industrial growth and decline, and both are places I think that are made by and of their people. Proud, warm, hard-working, resilient. Perhaps the greatest divide that you might identify between Hartlepool and Liverpool is the quality of the football. But regardless of the scale, the supporters would recognise, I think, common traits in each other. Passion, commitment, a sense of pride and belonging, a feeling of togetherness that comes from a common cause. I think that these are places that make us, and I was made in Hartlepool. That community upbringing, and I deliberately call it that, a community upbringing, broader than a family upbringing, has really shaped my thoughts about policing. And it's with thanks to my schoolmate Andy, not this one here, different Andy, that I found a route into policing. Andy left Hartlepool to come here, to Liverpool, to study. Now, don't judge, but he didn't like it. Not Liverpool, that is, but the course he'd chosen, civil engineering. So he left the course early and joined the police. And for 2 years, he shared his stories with me, and I was absolutely hooked. Just as an aside, I've got Andy's youngest son lodging with me at the moment whilst he does his legal studies in London before taking up a pupillage at Chambers in Leeds. So these are community connections that can last a lifetime and can span generations and geography. And very early on in my policing experience, I realised that there are so many people that don't get the benefit of that community upbringing that I had. That there were people who didn't feel safe in their own communities, or they didn't have a place that they could call home. I'll always remember my first call to a domestic assault. It was a graphic scene, the sort of scene that stays with you, and I was shocked. Imagine not feeling safe in your own home, let alone your own community. And what carries you through these challenges, those early shocks in service, is the teamwork, the sense of purpose, the leaders that remind you that you can make a difference to communities and their safety. And I'm so pleased that I worked with people that got me off to a good start and set me up to feel today that if I could turn the clock back and do it all again and join now, then I would, in a heartbeat. In my time as Chief Constable in Surrey, I always enjoyed welcoming new recruits into the service, brimming with enthusiasm and challenging questions. And as part of my welcome, I'd asked them to do a short thought experiment with me, which you can join in now. You've had a long week, it's Friday, this is a relaxing thing. All you have to do is close your eyes, take a long deep breath, and think of a place where you've loved to live. And I use that word intentionally, love, because it carries emotion with it. Remember the sounds and the smells and the emotions associated with that place. Just take a moment and have a think. So I can see quite a bit of quiet contemplation going on in the room, but I do want to wake you up before you have a snooze on a Friday evening. Now the new recruits are really talkative, and I know you're going to be the same. So who wants to share with me an image that you had in your head? See if you can channel that inner energy that a brand new recruit into policing does, where they can't stop themselves talking. They want to tell you about it. I can stand here for a while. Andy. Anfield. Tell me what's in your head and in your heart about Anfield and Andy.
It's just all about memories.
Yeah.
Previously, family around me.
Yeah.
Celebration, success.
Success.
Yeah. It's the whole thing.
Family, celebration, success. Yeah, Bernard.
The Sunday morning after my first alcoholic policy at university.
Yeah.
Apart from the feeling of, do I get myself to the hospital, it was of camaraderie, of meeting new people, of challenging and enjoyable conversation that previous evening.
Yeah.
Coupled with a mental note made not to drink so much bad red wine next time.
Yeah. Oh, so people around you, people who you feel safe with, you've had a shared experience with, for better or worse, but a sense that you feel some belonging there. I'll take one more. Yeah, hiya.
Place called St Bedrock in North Wales.
Yeah, tell me about St Bedrock in North Wales then.
There's a headland there, beautiful view over Cardigan Bay, see Snowdon. On a good summer's day you can see dolphins in the bay.
Wow, okay.
There's nobody around, it's where my family are from, it's relaxing, it's peaceful, and there's no crime.
No crime. And I bet you like...
Not because you're here,
Yeah.
there's no crime there.
There's no crime there. And I bet you like going back there, do you?
Yes.
Yeah, does it feel like a bit of a pilgrimage going?
I've got a house down there.
You got a house, fantastic. Thanks for sharing the stories, and I deliberately start with that exercise with new recruits, with those positive emotions and feelings, because so often we're trying to solve problems and we're starting from a sort of negative mindset, but starting positively, I think, makes a real difference. And I've found that every time I've done that little thought experiment, it leads to discussion just like we've had there, about safety and freedom, about friendships and community, and then in turn I'll take the conversation, so what can we do in policing to help nurture places where people love to live? And that simple idea, taken from my upbringing right on the beach on the northeast coast. I literally lived over the road from the beach, could walk out the front door, cross by the Nortons, which I always thought were bollards in the middle of the road. I got to age 11 when I realised it was the name of the hotel on the corner. I always thought they were called Nortons. That sort of simple idea has really carried me through my career and has been a bit of a touchstone for me. And it's given me a sense of purpose. That's to do all I can through policing to create communities that are safe, but also feel safe as well. And I've also learned in meeting this challenge that you have to adapt, to keep pace and find new ways to tackle the threats that undermine safety and feelings of safety. And this concept was also at the heart of the very first research project I ever did with colleagues in academia from the University of Surrey, when I discovered that there was an evidence base to this way of thinking. If you like, a formula that could lead to places where people love to live. And it developed into something called the National Reassurance Policing Programme, the evaluation of which I think remains a good read today. And there are colleagues in this room with us here this evening that also contributed to that research and that practice. Reassurance policing began with a paper written by Jane Harwood, a police staff colleague in Surrey, who was a great driver for change, and it was called Civility First. Based on the broken windows ideas of Wilson and Kelling in the US, the proposal aimed to tackle the reassurance gap. That is, why was it we had places where crime levels could be low, but fear of crime remained high? And the big idea at the centre of the theory for change was signal crimes. Martin Innes, now Professor Innes, was working at the University of Surrey on an idea about crime as communication. Why is it that some crimes and disorders send a signal to communities that all is not well, gaining prominence and attention, and other crimes pass unnoticed? And of course we can see this today, and we can all think of crimes, some in too stark a proximity, that tragically have national and international impact. But Martin wanted to understand what was happening. Why was it that it made a signal so strong or travel so far? And we asked Martin if he could apply this perspective to everyday crime and disorder problems to help us close that reassurance gap. The idea being that if we could identify those crimes that mattered most to people and deal with them effectively, then we could close the gap between safety and feelings of safety. So one of my first tasks in this as a keen and eager neighbourhood policing inspector was to write the business case to secure the funding from the Police Standards Unit at the Home Office. The problem was that there were some competing ideas at the time, and they were all chasing the money. We had Sir David Phillips, Chief Across the Border, who developed the Kent Policing Model, which became the National Intelligence Model. Matt Baggett in Leicestershire was working on priority places or neighbourhood management. Having sat in a meeting at New Scotland Yard, listening to all of the big thinkers in policing at the time debate the merits of each of these, I had my first moment of not being an observer. And I piped up from the end of a long meeting table to suggest that I write a paper that brings the ideas together into one proposal. And it was like I'd walked into a bar that was just for locals. There was an awkward silence when people looked down the table and thought, who's this fella? Thankfully, Sir Dennis O'Connor, my chief in Surrey at the time, came to my rescue. And I spent the next few days hiding away in a local station, speaking to the staff officers and project leads at the various big hitters to find out what language, specifically what language, and that's important, might be agreeable to all of them. Language that could build consensus and not division. And miraculously, it worked, all corralled around the idea for this national programme. We secured for the funding, for the research, for the evaluation, and to oil the cogs of operational activity. 8 forces and 16 trial sites later, including some here in Merseyside and across the border in Lancashire, we had a proven signal crimes perspective, the beginning of a national neighbourhood policing programme, a legacy commitment from the then Prime Minister Tony Blair to have neighbourhood policing in every borough and district, an investment of 16,000 police community support officers. Ideas that were scrolled on flip charts and the very best cutting-edge technology at the time, the printable whiteboard, developed through practice and through testing into national guidance, variations of which still exist today. Practice not just in the UK, but that spread across the world. And if you want to hear more about what lay behind the signal crimes perspective, perhaps we can come to that in the questions, and that's a hint, or as we would say, a reasonable line of inquiry. As part of the research for reassurance policing, we made a film about signal crimes, which was put together by the BAFTA award-winning documentary maker Roger Graff. In 1982, Roger had made the documentary, which was simply called Police, which exposed the police's shocking attitudes towards investigating rape. That one led to major reform and investigations. And in our signal crimes film as well, there was some equally valuable insights. There was a piece to camera by a neighbourhood officer in Blackpool, and he said something like, I honestly believed that the public's priorities were the same as our priorities, and now I know they're not. And in that simple statement, the central challenge of gaining community confidence had been unlocked. Do our communities believe that we really understand the problems that matter most to them? Do they think we're doing something about them to solve them? And what that also naturally leads to is the sort of conversations that we were having earlier, an approach about what's good about an area that can be built on. Questions like, what do we love about living here? It became crystal clear through the emerging evidence that if communities believe that we do understand those issues and that we act upon them collectively with them, then confidence in policing follows. We could strengthen the share price on which we trade to enable policing across a much broader mission in keeping people safe and feeling safe. But, and it is a big but, we now live in a very different world to that we were operating in the early 2000s. With over 50% of crime being committed online, with over 80% of crime having a digital footprint, with illegal commodities being traded on social media channels, with bots generating content that drives a wedge between communities that had previously been cohesive, with concerns over police standards, and influential leaders taking populist or polarised positions. So how much of that research remains valid? So that was a very long intro to the title of tonight's lecture. So in this time when public confidence can be shaped not only by the quality of local service, but by the tone of international online commentary, how should the police service respond? What are the historic principles and values that will help maintain confidence and promote safety in today's world? And what implications might there be for police reform? It's my belief that public confidence in us and our legitimacy police is not only shaped now by our understanding and engagement in solving local crime and disorder problems, but by our conduct, taken more broadly, our culture, and by commentary about our judgment, decision-making, and application of discretion. In other words, are we a police service that is there for everyone, or are we only here for some? Are we a police service that's prone to support some causes and not others, or are we truly impartial? Is there any truth to the criticism of two-tier policing? So to think about this set of problems, I'd like to go back a lot further than the 20 years of reassurance policing, back to first principles. those set out by the first joint commissioners of what was then termed the new police, the Metropolitan Police in 1829. So often referred to as the Pelion Principles, but all the evidence set out by Tony Moore in his wonderful biography of them indicates clearly that it was the work of Charles Rowan and Richard Mayne in setting out general instructions to new constables in their role as the first joint commissioners in the metropolis. Imagine that, a job share in 1829. I think Mark might value a job share now actually for a bit of a break. And it's the summary of their instructions, instructional material by historian Charles Reith in 1956 that's now commonly referred to as the Pelion Principles. But it's Moore's biography that I credit with the very helpful references that follow, and if you've not dived into it, it's well worth a read. And in looking at these foundational principles and values, I believe it's the detail of the language that's important, and we will look at it, and I'll bring some of it up on screen, as it gives you an indication of leadership intent, what was in their mind at the time. So let's look at the detail of the second principle, the first, of course, being that the primary duty of police is to prevent crime. So Rowan and Mayne approached it like this. It was noted that the commissioners have highlighted gratification in finding that no unnecessary use of was made by the police of their truncheons when called out, and that it is not appeased that in a single instance was unnecessary degree of violence used. The commissioners trust that by such form and temperate behaviour, the police have conciliated the populace and obtained the goodwill of all respectable persons. David Askeley, in his 1979 book, The Queen's Peace, commented that it was perhaps Rowan, who was the older of the two at the time, who appreciated that the future of the new police depended entirely on public acceptance, and that the constable and their conduct were the yardstick by which the whole new policing project would be judged. Jump ahead to Reith's summary. So this is 1829, 1956. We have the more familiar: to recognise always that the power of the police to fulfil their functions and duties is dependent on public approval of their existence, actions, behaviour, and on their ability to secure and maintain public respect. So you can see that it's a construct not just about physical restraint, but one about actions and behaviour, on which, of course, societal expectations change over time. So it's by no means static. And, of course, we get it wrong, especially when it comes to marginalised and minority communities. So there are three debates running at the moment. You could take the sex and gender debate, the debate about, well, going back to when I started in my service, the enforcement of laws against the LGBT community, which of course we will look back now and say that those laws were wholly inappropriate, and we're still rebuilding relationships now. Or it was mentioned in the introduction that I lead the efforts on the Police Race Action Plan. How do we right historic wrongs? Whereas recently, as the 1950s, the police were actively spying on black communities to undermine the character of them and their place in society. So these are things that have got to be wrestled with and always need checks and balances from the communities that we serve. So let's have a look at the third principle to see if that assists us any further. So from Rowan and Mayne, remember, there was no qualification more indispensable to a police officer than a perfect command of temper, and they should not allow themselves to be moved by the slightest degree by any language or threats that may be used. Performing duties in a quiet and determined manner was more likely to induce well-disposed bystanders to assist them should they require it. And as summarised by Reith, again perhaps more familiar, to recognise always that to secure and maintain the respect and approval of the public means also securing the willing cooperation of the public in the task of securing observance of the laws. It's here that I find the more precise language of Rowan and Mayne more helpful to these current day challenges. Not to be moved by the slightest degree by language or threats, performing duties in a quiet and determined manner. Also note that Rowan and Main are clear in both of these principles that they're not trying to please everybody. Notice they mention the goodwill of all respectable persons and assistance from well-disposed bystanders. They understood back then that there would always be people at the fringes, at the poles of the debate, not well-disposed to support policing, all respectable in their own behaviour. So let's stop here for a moment and apply this to a current day crime and disorder problem, the problem of populism. We've seen policing being drawn into populist debates, most notably with the accusation of two-tier policing and perhaps before that on activism and impartiality. This first gained prominence arising from the policing of the protests which followed the terrorist attacks on Israel, and then again following the widespread public disorder that followed the horrific murders in Southport. We saw senior figures make claim that policing discretion was not exercised fairly or legitimately. And since then, we've had a former Home Secretary calling for the release of someone convicted for inciting racial hatred online. Of course, we've the benefit now of being able to look back at independent reports from Sir Andy and the Inspectorate on activism and impartiality, and from the Home Affairs Select Committee report on the disorder, who've respectively set aside with supporting evidence such accusations. This is helpful, but both required policing to take long, deep breaths and not react instinctively to defend its position. That temperate behaviour that Rowan and Main were talking about. However, in leading in the midst of response to such events, I do believe that the thoughts of Rowan and Main are valid and helpful to us still, not to be moved by the language, to exercise temperate behaviour, and in doing so, we'll earn the support of respectable people and well-disposed bystanders. And I've still got incredible faith in well-disposed bystanders. Some private polling that we did during the disorder showed us a typical bell curve response. That a small percentage thought we were too heavy-handed, a small percentage thought we were too lenient, but most that we could have done just a little bit more or a little bit less. Let's move on then. Have a look at the fourth principle, which in some ways is more straightforward and again addresses physical restraint, but it's also central to the principle of policing by consent. Those in policing will be quite familiar with Reith's description. To recognise always that the extent to which the cooperation of the public can be secured diminishes proportionately with the necessary use of physical force and the compulsion for achieving police objectives. As we've seen now, Rowan and Main are more precise in their language. The constables are to recollect upon all occasions that they're required to execute their duty with good temper and discretion. Any instance of unnecessary violence by them in striking a party in their charge will be severely punished. A constable must not use his staff because the party in custody is violent in behaviour or language. In his briefing to officers prior to the deployment of the Coldfield riots, Rowan personally warned the officers to be temperate, to keep their temper and not to use more force than was necessary, and to take into custody those who were addressing the mob and those who carried banners and then dispersed the remainder. So here we see a very practical application of discretion that still exists in public order policing today, and of course we've now the added benefit of technology that allows us to identify people and take them into custody under safer and more controlled circumstances after the event. In the fifth principle, Rowan and Main are remarkably brief. To be civil and attentive to all persons of every rank and class, and warn that insolence and incivility will not be tolerated. A straightforward, civility first message, just like Jane Harwood's paper 20 years ago. Reith's interpretation is a considerable expansion on this. And this, I think, will be familiar to many of us. Seeking and preserving public favour, not pandering to public opinion, demonstrating impartiality to the law, complete independence of policy, without regards to the justice or injustice and substance of individual laws, ready offering of individual sacrifice and friendships to the member of public, without regard to their wealth, social standing, ready exercise of courtesy and friendly good humour, and ready offering of individual sacrifice in protecting and preserving life. Now, I have to say, with my passion for neighbourhood policing, this is one of my favourites. As Reith is describing what civility from policing looks like in practice. In my view, courtesy and friendly good humour can get you a long way. Or as I used to say to new recruits, learn to talk to strangers on buses. And they used to look at me as if I was lost the plot, but give it a go. It's good fun. In the 6th principle, Rowan and Main are addressing discretion and decisiveness. To be particularly cautious, not to interfere idly and unnecessarily, but when required to act, they should do so with decision and boldness. Here, Reith is a bit narrower, I think. Back again to physical discretion. Using only physical force when the exercise of persuasion, advice and warning is found to be insufficient. Using only the minimum degree of physical force which is necessary to achieve objectives. As an aside, I found this very helpful during the pandemic. If you recall the time when legislation was framed within days to prevent us from leaving our own homes, it was really quite unprecedented times and unprecedented restrictions on our freedom. And I recall vividly the National Conference call with Chiefs, chaired by my predecessor, where we were discussing what would our approach be to this new legislation. And during that call, I sent an email to some trusted colleagues describing the 4 E's. Engage, explain, we all needed the legislation explaining to us, encourage and enforce. And those 4 E's took hold in communication terms, but also in practical policing terms, and gave politicians a framework on which to give a sort of balanced view. And I think during the pandemic, political leaders gained an insight into what policing has known for decades, that it's really hard work getting people to do things by consent. You need trust and you need to have earned it. So let's stop here for a moment again and apply these lessons in history to another current day problem, the post-truth world. The assertion of lies, of facts, the generation of false narratives through misinformation and disinformation. How should policing even begin to respond to such challenges? Is it even a challenge that can be achieved, or are we now at a stage when such behaviour is becoming commonplace and the generation of deep fakes, false narratives and harmful content is out of control? I think not. These are problems that have been engineered into our society and to our technologies and can be engineered out, either socially or technically, and policing does have a role to play. However, we must exercise some degree of caution to what our role is again. I think the precision of the language of Rowan and Main is helpful. Rowan's warning about not to interfere idly, but when it is necessary to do so, and when to do so with boldness. This is a useful lesson around the policing of laws that may concern freedom of speech. Some tolerance is required, but when a line is crossed, for example, inciting racial hatred or violence, then strong action must be taken. Now, the line will change according to legal judgments and new legislation, but policing must be careful not to lower its guard. We must be vigilant to temperature changes and think about the civility first that we're charged with protecting. We must not take our lead from those in positions of power who have lost sight of these values. We must be leaders in our civil duties. I also think that the advice on taking out the ringleaders can apply to those perpetrating such crime and violence online. In the same way it does to be a mob on the street. As we're seeing in online harms, there must also be consequences for those that fail to make their platforms safe for children or turn a blind eye to criminality. We also need the assistance of many new technologies to help us in taking command and investigation decisions on when, where and how to intervene, and when to exercise discretion and maintain an even temper in the knowledge that the well-disposed bystander is not swayed. We're working on tools that will help us with just that, with deepfake detection, to help us on the identification of disinformation, help us understand if it's having any real-world impact, and when or if an intervention is required, what that response might be, and the specific language that is most effective in correcting a false narrative. Policing is not the only sector that needs to develop these tools and capabilities, and this is where partnerships, such as with universities like this, can be so beneficial. All of these are fascinating new research areas. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to cover the detail of any of the remaining principles, 7, 8 and 9. The 7th we now know as the public are the police and the police are the public, but as far as we know, Peel never said those words, and nor did Rona Main. It most likely originates from the 1361 Justice of the Peace Act. 8 concerns the separation of policing and judicial functions, also important, and 9, the evaluation criteria for policing around the absence of crime and disorder. Interestingly, on 9, it's thought that it might originate from Rowan's military training under St John Moore, different spelling, no relation, who noted the following. It is by the infrequency of crime in your regiment and not by the punishments that will appear in your regiment books that a general officer will judge of its state of discipline and of your capacity and conduct as a commanding officer. And of course that also requires integrity, not to fiddle the figures. You may have noticed that I've framed the current day problems using the work of Moises Naim from his book The Revenge of Power, charting the emergence of autocratic regimes which give us the framework of populism, post-truth and polarisation. And I've set out that I do believe that there are some antidotes written in our history that help with post-truth and populism. And for the last challenge of polarisation, I want to return to where I started. In dealing with division, with rising community tensions, with intolerance, I don't believe that there's any substitute for the quality of human contact that policing can provide. There is a phrase that policing is for everybody or it becomes for no one. And the way to demonstrate that is to signal that we care deeply about the problems faced by local communities. In the days of reassurance policing, I remember Matt Baggett, then Chief Constable of Leicestershire, talking about neighbourhood police officers as social entrepreneurs. By exercising control over criminality and disorder at the local level, we can be a catalyst for broader social change and for communities, when they feel safe to do so, to come together. We even produced a booklet for local beat officers called In Control. It seems to me that the obvious antidote to polarisation is to come together. And policing can definitely play a role in creating safe spaces where people can do so. Coming together is something that we must also do across policing in the United Kingdom if we're to have strength in our response to these current day challenges that we've skated across the surface this evening. This is one of the key drivers in why I've been such a strong advocate of the need for bold and ambitious police reform, built upon a strong neighbourhood policing foundation. Our current model, designed, as we've heard, on very strong values and principles and really helpful language that can still guide us today, has its organisational roots in a post-Second World War commission. Our structures and practices are influenced to this day by a royal commission that sat between 1960 and 1962, before even the pocket calculator, let alone the internet. Over recent months, leaders in National Police Chiefs Council, in our college, Counter-Terrorism, National Crime Agency and Inspectorate have united around the need for reform. It's long overdue so we can keep pace with rapidly changing criminal and safety threats, address the imbalances in funding and the lack of financial resilience that's developed following the years of austerity, to correct a governance model that is slow and complicated and that does not encourage consistent or always collaborative approaches to developing the new capabilities that I've spoken about this evening. Together we've called for 5 pillars of reform. The strengthening of local partnerships to prevent crime and common standards and expectations on neighbourhood policing. Secondly, the tiering of capabilities at the right places, nationally, regionally and locally, and addressing the question of whether 2 or 3 tiers are needed, just as has been done in many other jurisdictions around the world. To reset the governance, to make it clear who gets to decide on what, and not to let operational independence stand in the way of collective progress, being much clearer on performance expectations. A redesign of how the money flows, alongside the capabilities, as negotiating over every national development required to deal with the threats I've talked about allows the criminals to get ahead. And a much stronger national centre that provides strategic, enabling and operational functions with the powers to ensure consistency where consistency is needed. So with this bold and ambitious reform, built on the really strong values that I've talked about, we can make sure that we are adapting in a way that can stay true to those historic values, but also in a way that means wherever you live in the United Kingdom, in Liverpool or in Hartlepool, you know that you can rely on good quality local policing that has the access to the same capabilities to keep your family safe and your community safe in the threats from today's globally connected world. So to finish, I'd just like to return to where I started with that short thought experiment about police and love. And yes, you heard me correctly. Not John and Yoko, peace and love, police and love. Two words that perhaps you've rarely heard side by side, but for me are very natural. I hope you've gained an impression this evening that I love policing. And I think that people who police bring a great deal of love into the role. When I was chief in Surrey, 1 month into the first COVID lockdown, 88-year-old Dennis Kelland was murdered in his own home. He lived alone in Godstone in Surrey. The team working on operations thither very quickly identified and convicted his killer. A local man, whose name I won't repeat, but was very familiar to me as a local constable many years before. When the trial concluded, Dennis's family wrote a thank you note to the team and to me, and it was one small detail in that I found most emotional. The crime scene had been in place at Dennis's home for quite some time, and during that time, colleagues had taken the trouble to water his houseplants, saying that they could see how much he loved them and that they wanted to look after them. That spoke volumes to Dennis's family, about the police family and the care and compassion that we bring to our work. I'm not sure you can ever teach that, but we can share our stories about these things and let them become who we are. So I'm so grateful to my mate Andy, who shared his stories that brought me here today. I can get sentimental about policing, as you've probably gathered, about human frailty and about life, and I make no apologies for that. It's more than a vocation. This simple idea that I learned growing up in the community in the North East has definitely given me a sense of purpose in life. That is to do all I can through policing to create communities that are safe and feel safe too. And if you find work that you love, a vocation, a purpose, and I've also found it can carry you through the tougher times in life too, and we all have those. 10 years ago I lost my wife Sarah at far too young an age to ovarian cancer. And tomorrow I'll go back to Surrey to say farewell to my CID tutor, who got me started on my investigative journey, who now sadly is also beyond treatment for his cancer, and in typical policing fashion, he's booked a room in a pub to say farewell to all of his mates. What strength! People like Sarah and like Glenn shows that what true resilience is, amongst all the noise and the distraction of the modern connected world. They allow us to focus on the simple things that can carry us through the best and worst of time. So here in Liverpool, in this place of learning, in the John Lennon building no less, a place rooted in music, I will conclude with a song lyric from Nature Boy. I think the best version is sung by Nat King Cole, if you want to have a listen. And Nat sings, "The greatest thing that you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return." The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. Now, you can learn many, many things in wonderful settings like this at Liverpool John Moores. But if you can learn to love your purpose in life, then anything is possible. Police and love. I'm sure you'll agree, two words that were made for each other. So with thanks to my mate Andy, and in tribute to Sarah and to Glenn, thank you for welcoming me here this evening, for allowing me to share some stories and some ideas with you, I'm really enjoyed it. I hope you have on this warm Friday evening, and I'm very happy to take any questions on music, on football, or even on policing. Thank you.
Gavin, thank you very much for
My pleasure.
I'm Professor Steve Finnegan, also from LCAPS and School of Justice Studies. I just wanted to say initially, before questions, how interesting that was. Some of the older faces in the audience, ex-cops, will well remember the early 2000s with the Reassurance Project and the development of neighbourhood policing, which you were at the heart of. But of course, you've taken us much further back to 1829 to look at some of the standards and the values that were espoused at that time. And now, of course, you've highlighted some of the real challenges around trust and confidence, and you've touched on reform will be necessary. We might see whether some people would push you a little around what type of reform you think might be necessary over coffee, because you mentioned governance as well. We certainly talked about the role of police and crime commissioners, and as I say, Gavin is happy to take questions on anything related to the lecture that was just delivered. So let's go over to the audience. And Adrian, I think.
Thank you very much, Adrian James. I'm staff here. I hope this doesn't feel like I'm trying to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
And some of the reforms you're talking about, or you refer are necessary in terms of governance and joint working, really succeeding ones. There are 43 police forces in England and Wales.
I think it's harder on a model of 43. So when I spoke about the tiering of capabilities, I think in the modern world that we live in, we know that there are many things, combating deep fakes and how to respond in an agile way to misinformation and disinformation so that disorder doesn't grow, for example. That there aren't 43 different answers to that question. There may be 1, 2 or 3 that need to be developed collectively and together. And even though I sense in my 2 years chairing council that there is a movement of colleagues to recognise that more collective action is needed, the model is just not set up well to enable that. It's not quick enough or agile enough to do so. The money's not in the right places. We have to sort of negotiate it in every time we want to do something. So we do need to decide, what do we want to do nationally, what do we want to do regionally, and what do we want to do locally. As I touched on, many other jurisdictions around the world in addressing that question have said, well, do we need 3 tiers? Or is it a national and a local tier? The local tier being big enough to be resilient and have a set of capabilities that will get them through most problems. My personal view is that I think the days of the 43 are limited, not least by financial resilience, but also by the need to have those strong capabilities. So if it was my decision, I'd go, I don't know, 9 or 10 big strong regions, strong national entities. Interestingly, I was talking to my counterpart in the Netherlands. I know it's quite loud, isn't it? I'll move that down a bit. My counterpart in the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago. The Netherlands went from 100 and something police forces in the 90s down to 30 something, and then in 2014 went down to I think 9 or 10 with one national commissioner in the. Well, there was 2 central bodies. They're now thinking about doing one, and they describe now being able to govern the policing of the Netherlands with a board of 16 people. That's wholly different than trying to do it with a council of 60. So that's where my thoughts are on it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Yeah.
I'm trying to put football back into the analogy.
Okay.
When I was growing up as a lad in the late 60s and early 70s, I think policing was like being a referee at a rugby match. I think policing nowadays is like being a referee at a football match. You're getting shouted, screamed at by players, by people, specialised coaches, like supporters, and then a bigger, broader community who lives, online. And I think a lot of that has come through technological advancement and societal change that has been so remarkably quick that it really sort of overpowers. And if I bring the academic space in, academic space is now concerned about technology, generative AI, etc., etc., etc. So where are the technological opportunities for policing in the next 5 or 10 years, rather than framing it as a negative? Do you have any ideas about possibilities?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there are 3 categories on which we're doing our thinking about emerging new technologies and where they help. So number 1, what are the technologies that can just replace those volumetric tasks that no longer need to be done by officers and staff colleagues, quite frankly, which they find enormously frustrating and time-consuming. And in our wellbeing surveys, they will describe them as stresses that just making their day-to-day life more difficult. And many of those, I think, there's a real opportunity to sort of engineer them out. There's a second set of technologies that will allow them to catch more criminals and put more people before the courts and reduce more disorder. And of course, right at the forefront of that prominence at the moment is the facial recognition developments, for example. But equally, we had a brilliant talk in the office from a DI on the Trident sort of gangs and guns unit earlier in the week, who was talking about some of the things that they're doing on online marketplace for selling firearms, for example. Technologies that'll get us to the evidence of what's needed to get the case before the court more quickly, decisively, and often with overwhelming evidence that people can't argue with. And then the third, and this is perhaps the most interesting, what are the technologies that help us keep pace and get ahead of criminality? So in particular, how are they exploiting tools like AI to commit fraud and so on? But what are we doing to leapfrog ahead? And if I've got a fear in that, it's about cyber resilience. If there's one thing coming into this role that is a much bigger problem than I saw it as when I was a chief in a county force, it's the cyber resilience threat. And of course, this week we're seeing it in the retail sector. There is absolutely no reason why that couldn't happen in the policing sector. Another driver, by the way, for a strong national centre that's fixing that once and for everybody.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Yeah, just at the back. Thanks, Elizabeth.
If I'm allowed 2 questions. So one is, Gav, defining thing very much about love.
Yeah.
What's it going to take for the UK government to love and show love to UK policing? And if I am allowed a second, I'd just be interested to know whether you think that the job of a chief constable is now too difficult to do. And perhaps, if I may, invite Steve to just make a remark or 2 about that as well.
Yeah. I'll start with the second then. No, it's definitely doable if you love it, but you've got to have a lot of love for it because it comes with a lot of pressures now. If you look at the wellbeing survey work from the National Staff Association, they will describe that pressure as was covered in the last question. The volume and range of scrutiny and commentary about your actions. We were talking before we started this evening about a colleague that was called out in media in the last couple of weeks for the actions they were taking around the police race action plan. And it takes a brave chief to take a deep breath, let it pass over, to basically do what Rowan and Main were recommending, not interfere idly, let the storm pass because the well-disposed bystander is not going to be swayed by it. But that takes some strength of character, and it absolutely takes its toll. It's taken its toll, especially on female chief constables at the moment, who can often find themselves at the centre of all sorts of online hatred and vitriol, and we do need to find a way to deal with that more effectively. So the second pressure they describe is the political governance relationship that currently exists, and I think that's another pillar of the reform that we need to do. In terms of love with the current government, maybe behind the scenes that they do love it, but they do love us, but they don't say it enough publicly. I think there's one thing that will give them more confidence to be more public about their appreciation for chiefs and for policing, and that's if we deliver on the neighbourhood policing promise. It's definitely my firm belief that if we do that well, our communities will notice the difference. There's been some great coverage of, say, the work that Steve's doing in Greater Manchester in, retaking control of the, I forget the name of the neighbourhood, but where there was all the sort of counterfeit shops had taken over and all that sort of stuff. The in control bit. I think if we do that well, it may well give our political leaders the confidence to do some of the other things that we're asking for. So I think that's part of the deal.
I'll not take up much of Gavin's time, but yeah, the role of the Chief Constable is very difficult, and I think it's getting increasingly difficult. Gavin has touched on governance. We did have a conversation along with John and Andy earlier where we talked about the introduction of police and crime commissioners in 2012. I suppose I was one of those lucky Chief Constables in that I had a good relationship with my NPCC. We fell out occasionally, but we knew where the lines were, operational independence and direction and control. It's a very different operating environment than it was when a number of us became Chief Constables, when you had police authorities, 17 individuals that you would go before every month, and they would hold you to account. It's very different now.
Nobody's followed the reasonable line of inquiry yet. You'd get in trouble for that.
So we've got a
I don't need a microphone. I would normally go down the deep fake line because that's what my research team do.
Yeah.
We're going to go differently. The story you told about your colleagues doing the flowers.
Yeah.
If I can call it the Dixon of Dock Green, friendly copper, you want policing with permission from those public.
Yeah.
And those stories are great. How are you going to fight the fact that if you have one even bruised apple in the pot, that video is now all over Facebook in seconds?
Yeah.
Where, for that family, there might be 20 or 30 people, if you ignore what you've told us, who would know about it.
Yeah. The impact of poor police behaviour and police conduct, in the way that was described by Rowan and Main, the corrosive effect of it, they saw it then. Of course, the corrosive, and interestingly, if you've ever heard Lawrence Sherman do his bit about the early days of the Met, about how many people they sacked in the early years, it's eye-watering. Not many people survived the initial recruitment process because they were trying to find the right people. The standards that were expected in policing were not universal standards across the populace, which is why we've got to really guard against our standards and behaviour. And of course now, as you've described, one intemperate moment can be known by so many more people. I'll turn to Martin's signal crimes work, and what we learned through that as well is that you can also have signal victories. So maybe like I was saying earlier on, Steve's work in GMP with the counterfeit stuff is a signal victory. We have just got to have many more signal victories than we've had in recent time, or being confident to broadcast. And that again, back to Rowan and Main, not to interfere idly, but when to do so boldly and with confidence. We've got to re-find our confidence about communicating those signal victories when we get it right.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Any more questions, folks?
Gavin, I'd just like to ask you your views on the appropriateness and the effectiveness of current recruitment to chief officers. You talk about sort of momentary lapses of temper being intemperate, and I think the public understand that and they get it.
Mm.
What they don't get are sex pests as chief constables, people wearing medals they're not entitled to.
Yeah.
And there doesn't seem to be a month goes by when a chief officer is not in trouble for something.
Yeah.
I think we've already had Steve allude to police and crime commissioners.
Yeah.
We clearly have the ability to select almost unilaterally chief officers.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder what your views are for the future, because it's not looking very bright at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, there have been too many examples at chief officer rank that send a terrible message to others, aren't there? And I'm speculating here, but I do wonder whether the broader political climate, as described by Moises Naim in his book about the post-truth world, where we see some of this behaviour in some of our very public figure leaders, that somehow a message filters down that this is okay and you can get away with it. And as of course, as Ronan Main and Reith summarised, in policing you can't, because the whole success of the project is judged on the conduct of the constable, and as chiefs we're constables, and we send an even stronger message about the standards and the culture. I do not profess to know what has driven all of these individual acts and how people get themselves into a position where that happens, but what we do recognise is the impact of it. For balance, though, I would also say that we recognise that there have been colleagues whose reputation and name has been strongly and severely tarnished by public exposure, unfairly and unnecessarily, by poor decision making by some of those police and crime commissioners. That is also damaging because it undermines the confidence of colleagues to step forward to come for those positions. So the balance is wrong. Not as part of the police reform pillars that I talked about, but there is reform of the sort of accountability structure at the moment, and one of the things that needs to change in there are the thresholds as to when something is necessary for investigation and when something is necessary for action. There's a willingness across a range of leaders to resolve that. I think if we can, maybe we can claim back some of the territory that we've lost in recent years.
Yep, we have another question.
Yeah. So following from what you've said, answer my question. Do you think the police could learn from teachers, where there's the Teachers Regulation Authority who are banning teachers daily, but you don't hear the same about police? And some of the, from all levels, some of the things that they've done, you think, oh my God, why aren't they getting dealt with? So, do you think you could learn from that? Where, for example, a teacher can't even be convicted of drunk driving without losing their job. But there are coppers with speeding points that are still in the motorway unit or...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to keep some balance and get the thresholds right. I mean, I don't think any of us would put forward a position that there can't be people in policing who've made mistakes in the past, have learned from them and moved on. There is an opportunity to rehabilitate. I know of plenty of colleagues who are wonderful colleagues with the sort of higher standards of integrity and behaviour now, but did things in their youth that they regret that they did. So I don't think we should be puritanical about this. But we should be clear on our standards. The one thing that I find attractive about the licence to practice idea, particularly when you look in the medical world, is that in the setting of the licence to practice, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, if there are colleagues in the room who know better than this, I think every 5 years they refresh what's in the licence based on public consultation. So they get a view from the public as to what they think are important. Not just in terms of professional competence, but in terms of expected behaviour and conduct, and that's reflected in the licence. And I think there's great value in getting that public perspective, because when I was talking earlier about keeping pace with societal norms, it's when we get out of step, I think, that you can have real problems. And then just to the specific point about banning people, there's plenty of cops getting sacked and going on the bad register. Sadly, It is 593, Serena's given me the figure. Maybe it's just because I'm tuned into police media, but I read about plenty of those in the police media. I don't necessarily see much about teaching, but maybe that's just the different media we're consuming.
Okay, we've got a question here. Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you, Gavin. Thanks so much for your lecture. Appreciate that. So this is I'm a PGR, a researcher from engineering department. So my question is about the crimes or protests involved by the mass. So after Southport, and even before Southport, we observed the UK, there are here and there a lot of protests, street protests. Some are involved by the rhetoric behind, like religious affair, and also some ethnicity involved. In that case, do you have any plan before, like scenario planning, how to intervene, when to intervene? How do you position the forces like proportionate to the mass? Like that sometimes street protesters become hooligan, you know. They become rioters. So in that case, what is the tipping point, or what is the threshold that you consider to deploy forces and to arrest something like that? Sometimes this is a very thin margin.
The policing of protest and public order in today's world, I think, is one of the most challenging aspects of policing that happens. Sir Andy's predecessor, Tom Windsor, referred to it as the brain surgery of policing. That these things are incredibly nuanced, not just in their planning, but in their execution of those plans on the day. And we require a great deal from those individual colleagues that might be at that seat of emerging disorder in amongst a wider protest, and those judgments are very difficult. Post-event in public media, we then often see a segment of something that's happened out of context, and a bit like we were saying earlier, that spreads far and wide, and how do you get the sort of counter-narrative to be equally strong so people can see the full detail of the truth. And of course now we also have great technology and opportunity to do identification when it's not safe to act at the time, to be able to get people later. Now, I am not a public order specialist. That's not something I've spent my career pursuing, but I do appreciate from talking to the commanders that are doing this week in, week out in places like London, that those judgment calls are very difficult. I mean, again, back to the words of Rowan in Maine, choosing who to intervene on, who to take out and who to disperse. That's one of the reasons that, where policing discretion needs to come to its fore, and there are always going to be people that disagree with those positions. So, in the early weeks of the protests in London after the Hamas attacks on Israel, we all saw play out publicly what the Home Secretary's views were in comparison to the Commissioner of the Met. I sat in on some of those discussions where we were talking about the balance, and that's another reason why the operational independence of policing needs to remain strong, because if you want us to be accountable, we need to be independent. If we get those decisions wrong, we're accountable for those decisions. But if somebody else is reaching in and saying this is how it should happen, then they become accountable for those decisions. And I would suggest that's not a great place to be. The final thing I'd say on it is that we need to give a great deal of leadership support to those colleagues that do those difficult roles, because some of those judgment calls are extraordinarily difficult.
Can I have another question quickly? So we all are shocked by the Netflix series, which is known as Adolescent, which is released recently.
Yeah.
Which is about the adolescent crime and also cyber crimes, and also the use of screen and also screen edit, and also games, online gaming, etc. So what is your insight or also outlook in the UK in the future? That would be a real problem, And how would you tackle such kind of condition from the policing point of view?
Yeah. It's one of the things that worries me the most about the future is what's happening to our children and young people by the consumption of such content. And in the Netflix documentary Adolescence, of course, we saw the impact that these influences are having on young men in particular, and their violent attitudes that can emerge towards women. I read a National Crime Agency briefing recently about the most extreme ends of that type of activity, and it is extraordinarily concerning. I think it's important to recognise that in policing we definitely can't solve this on our own, but back to the message about in control, where we can exercise control and send a very strong message through really high quality investigations and strong prosecutions, it's really important to do so. I said recently in an interview, we also need to see that strength coming from Ofcom in the new online harms legislation that they've got available, to make the providers of some of these platforms also recognise the harm and impact that it's having on children and young people. Ultimately, I think the progress will come through an educational challenge. We have to help our young people through that family upbringing, through that community upbringing, to recognise the dangers that they are potentially exposed to. But there are some practical ideas being discussed in the same way that we now have for games and films, age-related content and so on. We're going to have to be much more robust in those sort of controls. And of course, we've seen in Australia that they're doing restriction applications up to a certain age now. Whether that would be successful, it'd be interesting to watch what other jurisdictions are doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Gavin. Yeah. Thank you.
We're expecting to see an increase in community sentencing to relieve pressure on prisons.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that as being something that's going to hinder in the short term community neighbourhood policing, even if in the medium term it's expected to reduce reoffending?
So I agree that when done well, and I've got experience of this from leading a force, particularly with children and young people, female offenders, care leavers, military veterans, keeping people that don't need to be in custody out of custody, with good community reparation activities, with good rehabilitation activities, which needs good local service provision. It can't just be nothing. That can definitely have a positive impact. In the short term, I think you're right to identify that if we have another wave of prison releases, then that needs to come with some element of control, whether that's through more enhanced electronic monitoring, whether it's through strengthening probation service activities. It's going to need investment. And the line that I've been taking when I've been discussing this with ministers and senior officials is just because it's out of prison doesn't mean it's out of justice. And there's a role for the justice system to still do what the justice system needs to do to keep some control, in the same way I've been talking about policing control tonight, because this can't all just flow to us. But I agree with the proposal that if done well in the medium term, it can definitely have a crime reduction effect.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Yep, we have one on the left.
Thanks for your talk tonight. I found it marvellous. Colin Robinson, I've been working with the Merseyside team in CCTV for about 5 years. And I find it interesting, the love that they have for their job and how much they care for it. What we're not getting, which I really don't understand, is the way the media, the mainstream media, I'm calling it now, not necessarily the social media, always seem to pick on the worst things. I was wondering how your views on that and how that can be managed and improved, because what I'm seeing is completely the opposite. People completely care about their job.
It's all about the cash, isn't it? it's all about money. They basically need people to click on things to generate money. And I think as we've learned through how this technology is that is emerged, that the human nature is that we're motivated by shock and outrage to click on things more than we are on stories about my mate Andy or tribute to my mate Glenn. It just gets, unless it's dogs and horses, as policing has found sometimes to its problem. The media are generating shock and outrage, a bit like Moises Naim says in his book, and for some reason it's our human nature to engage with that. I don't think, and this is not a defeatist view, that in policing alone we're necessarily going to be able to change the narrative that media, whether it's mainstream or local, can, social, can tell the story about us. I think we have to find much more effective ways using some of these same technologies, developed really well for precision targeting of communities, and some forces are doing this brilliantly on Facebook. Their signal victories, getting them to the right audiences in the right places so people are seeing them. And we know when that's done well, that those communities will then have a very different view of their local policing teams, and we see that in the stats, incidentally. So even though the national stats about confidence in policing, trust in policing as an institution clearly are on the decline, often where done well, the confidence in their local policing team, when you ask them that question, can be resiliently high. And some of it's because they're getting that human connection, and they're also getting on their Facebook feed that their local team did this round the corner from them last night. I think that's the answer, rather than trying to think about how we solve the media, because that's just a massive money question, I think.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Right, I was going to say one last question, and you can have it.
Thanks, Steve. I'll speak up, hopefully people can hear me. So thanks, Gavin, for the presentation.
Thanks, Matthew.
Yeah, so I was really taken by, as an organisational leader, you talked about meeting those people starting out in their policing career, like the exercise that you did, and you got people thinking about their sort of claims and their negotiations of belonging. And I was just picking up two questions related to that about those people who are coming into the service. And I think the first one is, as you're meeting people coming into the service, when you got us to do that exercise about where we felt safe, where we felt we belonged, and you posed the question about how can policing facilitate people feeling more safe, I guess are you seeing that people coming into policing have that emotional intelligence to understand that policing can also be a way of not belonging and making people feel unsafe, and that their claims of safety and belonging and claims of security are somewhat ineligible? So there's that piece about emotional intelligence. And then the other dimension of belonging that I guess I'm interested in is, as you're finding these people coming into the service, you've talked about your own history with policing. It's given you a great sense of identity and belonging in service, and the values that it represents for you and the people that you've worked with. Are those people who are coming into policing now, are they looking for that sense of organisational belonging? And do you feel that they are going to have that same sense of organisational belonging that you've had? In an era where we're talking about portfolio careers, moving around. So it's those two dimensions of belonging.
I'm extraordinarily optimistic about colleagues that are coming into to policing. And let's not forget, during the years of the pandemic, we recruited 47,000 new colleagues into policing during those pandemic years, but 250,000 people applied to join policing. 250,000. So there's a huge body public out there who still maintain a very strong interest in wanting to serve their community, and I take sort of great hope from that. My experience of meeting so many new recruits, and I know whether the team here feel the same, is that they are sort of brimming with energy and pride and passion in the same way that that I was when I joined. So I do still see those same motivations. There are some worries for me in that though as well though. You know, back to the leadership of the Race Action Plan. Black colleagues or colleagues from other minority communities still tell us that they're having a really tough time in policing. When we look at attrition, there are still disparity rates in that. When we look at the inclusion in the conduct system, you know, they're being disproportionately taken into the conduct system, which really undermines their sort of sense of belonging in the organisation. So by no means is everybody get in that sense. I have a strong belief that the principles of neighbourhood policing that we talked about doing with the community, you can also do that inside the organisation. In fact, the research tells you that it does have a bearing. So we did a Government Office for Science commission through our Chief Scientific Advisor, Paul Taylor, about the drivers of confidence, and no surprises, all of the evidence about neighbourhood policing comes back, understanding community problems. But in the evidence base, what they also found was about the importance of internal advocacy, and that if colleagues feel that they've got a voice in their organisation, some influence over their day-to-day work and the direction of their team, unit, department, or the force, then that plays ultimately externally to what the public feel about the organisation. So we've got to work hard on both fronts. Specifically the point of emotional intelligence, I think the people that have joined policing now have got way more emotional intelligence than I did when I started. And if Andy Marsh were here, Chief Executive of our college, he would also talk about cultural competence. I regularly still put my foot in it with things that perhaps I shouldn't put my foot in it with. And I think our new recruits are so much more culturally competent than I ever was or could probably hope to be.
Okay, thanks Matthew. Right, that's it folks, time is against us. Gavin, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Not just for a really interesting presentation, but also for being prepared to take questions on any topic at all.
Yeah, general policing pub quiz as I call it.
Okay, well, I'm sure that people here would agree that you've answered all of those questions as openly and as candidly as you could.
No, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Steve.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
And of course, thank you to you all for attending tonight, and enjoy the rest of the bank holiday weekend. Thank you.
I had to laugh.